Called this first section Jacob the trickster. These days, I think probably you would have to call him Jacob the fishing expert or Jacob the scammer, okay, or whatever like that, any of those internet nonsenses. But that was kind of the mentality he had. So we need to talk about Jacob for a little bit, and if you want to open your Bibles, we can begin more or less in, I guess, chapter 26 of Genesis. No, 25, the end of chapter 25. Isaac and Rebekah have twins. Esau is born first, but it says that as Jacob is coming out of the womb, he is grabbing his brother's heel. And so the implication is he's going to make his brother trip and fall. Okay, and so we see how it works. It says that Jacob is a ruddy and hairy fellow, which is an allusion, by the way, to the natives of Edom, which was a next-door neighbor country. And Jacob was very much more smooth-skinned. Okay, so in verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So, once when Jacob was boiling pottage, lentil stew, if you'd like, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me have some of that red pottage, for I am famished." Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die. What use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." He swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he ate and drank, and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. But thus also Jacob is playing the game. Okay, so when we get to the story of the business of getting the blessing, it's really an extension of this selling of the birthright. Okay, in many, many ways. Esau is not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer, as they say. Okay, he's not really all that with it. But nevertheless, this is what he does. Okay, so he's grabbing the heel of Esau when he's born. Esau says, hairy and red, a place, as I said, on the nation of Edom. Now, tricking, maybe not tricking Esau into selling the birthright, strictly speaking. And that's property too, by the way. Okay, the birthright means the flocks and the servants and the camels and the money and all this other kind of stuff. Okay, and Jacob has an inheritance now. Typically, the oldest son will get the lion's share, literally, of any inheritance. Okay, and so it might be 2/3. Okay, it might be as much as 2/3. So if you remember the story from Luke chapter 15 of the prodigal son, the younger one says, "Give me now what is coming to me." Okay, so he gets the smaller portion, but he gets it now. Okay, Jacob is playing that game also. So he gets Esau to sell the birthright for some lentil stew. Mind you, I know a restaurant in Assisi that makes some of the greatest lentil soup you'll ever eat in your life. So I can understand why Esau might have been willing to sell a birthright for a good bowl of lentil stew. Now we go to the next story of the securing of the blessing. Okay, this is in chapter 27. The key here is that Isaac is so old, his eyes are so bad, he can't see. He can't see. Evidently, he can't hear too well either. Okay? But anyhow, he says, Esau is called to Jacob's bedside, and he says, "My son, here I am." He said, "Look, behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver, and your bow. Go to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me savory food such as I love. And bring it to me that I might eat, and I may bless you before I die." So Rebekah is hearing all this. I'm not going to read the entirety of the story, but you pretty much know the story. Esau goes off to hunt, and what Rebekah says is, "I want my favorite boy to get the blessing." Okay, so that's great. We'll look at the blessing words themselves in a minute. So what they're going to do is going to take a goat from the flock, butcher it, put the skin on so that Jacob feels hairy, If that's going to trick you, I don't know, but nevertheless. And the old man at the end of it says he likes the meal. I guess Rebekah knows the kind of food that Isaac likes, just like Esau does. But Esau didn't have a lot of luck hunting. And so, in fact, Isaac makes the comment, how'd you get it so quickly? Well, the Lord gave it to me. Oh, yeah. And so, in fact, there's Isaac saying, well, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the arms are the hairy arms of Esau. So I'll give you the blessing. So, maybe Isaac isn't playing with a full deck at this point either. It's kind of hard to know. But let's look at the blessing. In verse 27, Jacob came near to Isaac and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments. He is wearing Esau's garments. And said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you. Nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. Okay, good words. That last bit of the blessing, by the way, echoes quite a lot the blessing given to Abram when he makes the covenant with God. Okay, all the nations of the earth will be blessed in you. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Okay, so great. He gets out. Here comes Esau now. He wants the blessing. Okay, and we're at verse 32. Isaac says, who are you? He says, I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau. And Isaac trembled violently and said, who is it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceeding great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, even also, O my father. But he said, your brother came with guile, and he's taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? He supplanted me 2 times. He took away my birthright. Now he's taken away my blessing. Do you have not a blessing reserved for me? And so, let's go to verse 39. Isaac answered and said, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword shall you live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. And it says, no surprise, now Esau hated Jacob because of this. Okay, now what's going on? From our point of view, what just happened doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay? Because if the old man is tricked, and say, well, never mind, I'll just give you the blessing. I didn't mean it to him. In Old Testament times, you can't do that. Okay? A nice little catchphrase I used with my students when I was teaching Old Testament was the blessings, or curses for that matter, are words that work. Okay? They are effectively prophecies. And if you wanted to really intensify the prophecy, as the Old Testament prophets did, you would act them out as well. Okay? But once it's given, the word is spoken, it can't be taken back. It's done. It's a done deed, and it's as material as the body is itself. Okay? We got to have that mentality about understanding the blessing. Words that work and can't be taken back. So, in fact, if you were at Mass this morning, you heard the end of chapter 55 of Isaiah. As the rain and the snow come down, and do not leave there without watering the earth, making it fertile and fruitful, so shall my word be. It shall not return to me void. It shall accomplish the end for which I sent it. And that's the way it is. The word has gone out. Okay? And blessings, especially the blessings of old men on their deathbed, are extra specially powerful. So, Jacob wins, so to speak. But he also knows now that his older brother hates him and is going to plot against him. He's going to plot against his life. So Rebekah says, you better get out of town. Go to your uncle Laban up there. He'll take care of you. So he does. He does. We'll skip the business of the dream at Bethel for various reasons. And we'll just observe that one of the things that is said in the beginning of chapter 28, maybe the verse 46 of chapter 27, going into that, Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm weary of my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. It's kind of ironic that after all the trickery and whatnot, Isaac is still blessing and sending off, Jacob to protect him. Okay, I guess he doesn't want his little kid to be hurt either, But notice also who is going to be married to whom, okay? Can you say the word incest? I mean, that's what's going to, got to marry one of your kinsmen, okay? So go to your mother's brother and marry your niece, or your cousin rather, is what's going on. Kind of strange. That's the way they think in those days. Also, you'll notice that they had no problem having more than one wife and a whole bunch of concubines on the side. Okay? Life goes on and life changes. So, Jacob gets up there. Don't marry a Canaanite woman. Go off to Laban. And Esau, let's see, in verse 20, in chapter 28, verses 8 and 9. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he charged him, You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and gone to Paddan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took to wife, besides the wives he had, Mahaleth, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. So, in other words, you shafted me by not giving me the right blessing, I'll show you. So Esau is kind of throwing it back into the face of Isaac at this point, okay? You don't want us to marry a Canaanite woman? Ha! Yes, I will. Yes, I will. And notice he also goes to his family, okay? Ishmael would probably be his stepfather. Oops. So, they're all kind of interbreeding there. So, now we get the great scene of working for Rachel. This is in chapter 29, pardon me. He gets there and he says, okay, I'll take care of you. And so in verse 15, Laban says to Jacob, Behold, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what are your wages? What do you want? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was Leah, the younger was Rachel. Rachel's eyes were weak, but Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful and lovely. Jacob loved Rachel. He said, I'll serve you for 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. And Laban said, It's better that I should give her to you than anyone else. It's okay, stay with me. He worked for 7 years, and they had a wedding. Guess what? This is another thing. It would be hard for us to imagine, okay? Keeping in mind that if you really want to know what these women would have looked like in terms of their dress and whatnot, think of the really, really strict, observant Muslim women over in the Middle East, okay, with the burqa and everything else, okay? All you see is the eyes, pretty much. And on the wedding night, okay, and she's still in there. She probably got a veil over her head, and we're not talking about a transparent veil here. We're talking about like a blanket, okay? Then off they go after the wedding ceremony is contracted, and into the tent. Needless to say, there's no neon or fluorescent tubing or anything like that in the tent. And they do the marital thing, and the next morning when daylight occurs, oh, wrong one. Oh, no. But the contract has been made, okay? The words were exchanged, intercourse was had, that's it, they're married. And so in the same way that Isaac cannot take his blessing back and give it to Esau, in the same way now, Jacob can't be unmarried in all to Rachel, or to Leah rather. That's just the way it is, can't do it, okay? Annulments did not exist in those days. Just leave it at that. So, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. This is verse 25. And Jacob said to Laban, What is this you've done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me? Ha. Okay, now he's on the other end of being deceived, you see. Okay, Laban said, well, it is not done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Of course, he could have told him that 7 years ago, but he didn't. So, 7 more years and you can have the one you want. So he winds up working 14 years instead of 7. Oh, well, that's the way it goes. Yeah, oops, it's Leah. So the new deal is 7 more years, and if you like, Jacob the trickster has now had tricks played on him. He's not all that happy with it, needless to say. So he works another 7 years, and the combination of kids is very, very interesting. Okay, let's have a look at the genealogy here. In verse 31 of chapter 29. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son and called his name Reuben. Okay? Notice that even though in the genealogy in Matthew's gospel, the genealogy to Christ is traced through Judah. Judah is in fact the 4th son, not the 1st. Okay? Reuben is the eldest. And so, if I can jump ahead a little bit, when you see the whole story of Joseph and his brothers, okay, it's kind of a conflation of perhaps 2 versions, because in one case, yeah, it's Judah that says, maybe we can do this, we can get some money out of him, don't kill him, we'll sell him to the Midianites. But then it's Reuben who makes the first statement about let's not kill him, let's just throw him in the cistern. Okay, so Reuben, it says, intended to go back and get him later on. So Reuben is actually the eldest. Okay. She conceived again, verse 33, and bore a son. Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he's given me this son also, and named him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son. This time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was called Levi. And then she conceived again and bore a son. And so this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. 4 kids, 4 sons. Can you imagine how envious Henry VIII would have been? You know? All he wanted was a son. Went through 6 wives trying to get one. Then the one he did get died when he was 15 or 16, I think it was. So, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I will die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. Said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of your womb? See, it's all her fault, okay? Of course, in this case, he's got the track record of 4 kids from the other woman, so, look pretty convinced. Okay. So, it says here, she said, here is my maid Bildah. Go into her, that she may bear upon my knees, and even I may have children through her. So, she gave him her maid Bilhah as a wife. Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God has judged me and has heard my voice and given me a son, and therefore his name is Dan. Rachel's maid conceived again and bore Jacob a second son, and this one is called Naphtali, etc., etc. So actually, you get just 2 sons born to Rachel herself. Okay? All the rest of the sons either come from Leah or the serving maids, the concubines. In the same way, if you remember, that was what happened when it looked like Sarah couldn't have children. And so she says, look, take my maid Hagar and let me have a child through her. So Abraham has intercourse with Hagar, and that is the origin of the child Ishmael. Okay? Then it's Isaac who miraculously is born after that from Sarah. So we have all these kids. Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children. She took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's maid Zilpah had a bunch of kids. So, wow, it's the way it is. 10 sons by Leah and Zilpah, and by Bilhah as well. And then 2 finally are going to be given through Rachel. Joseph and Benjamin, who, needless to say, are going to become the favorites. Okay, they're going to become the favorites. So, that's the way it is. But what's important, I think, for us to see is in chapter 33, Earlier it says that it's time for him, for Jacob and Laban to kind of calm things down. They had a big fight. One wants to try to kill the other. Jacob is now running away from Laban also. He's heading back home. He knows that his brother Esau is furious with him still, or believes he is, and so he's going to send a peace offering. And just, you don't have to go there, but it just says that he's going to send 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 he-asses. These he delivered into the hand of his servants. He drove every one by itself and said, pass them on and get them to Esau. When Esau meets you and asks you, what are you doing? To whom do they belong? You are to say, these belong to your servant Jacob. They are presents sent to my lord Esau. Moreover, he is behind us. So a peace offering is offered. We have the wrestling at the Jabbok ford between Jacob and the angel, which I won't go into because I want to look rather at the reconciliation. Chapter 33. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. And he put the maids with their children in front, Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. Benjamin hasn't been born yet at this point. He went himself on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. You hear a little bit of an echo of the prodigal son and the father right there, okay? Somebody coming home who was in the wrong and is being accepted and welcomed by the person who wronged him. Really, really beautiful scene here. He said, who are these with you? And Jacob said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the maids drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? Jacob answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Notice he's humbling himself, putting himself underneath his brother, whom he had supplanted with trickery earlier on. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Jacob said, no, I pray you, if I found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For truly, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. With such favor you have received me. Accept, I pray you, my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt mercifully with me, because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. And so, they part peacefully. This is a beautiful scene, okay? It's a beautiful scene of reconciliation, which is so crucial. What was the thing that triggered the reconciliation mentality in Jacob? Undoubtedly, realizing once he was tricked himself, what it felt like and what he had done to his brother. It's only after he suffers himself personally that he starts to recognize what he inflicted on his brother unjustly. So we put that together, and that's important. Now, without going into a lot of the detail, we know in fact that a further implication, or a further infliction, I should say rather, of suffering and trickery is going to go on, and that's with the supposed death of Joseph. Okay? Thrown, look, here's his coat, here's his long coat, blood-stained, no doubt about it, Dad, that's what we found. Must be killed. Wild animals got to him as they had sent him off to Egypt. Okay, and so there's Jacob absolutely shattered by one of his 2 favorite sons. Why? Because it's from the favorite wife. Totally shattered, inconsolable. Now, there's going to be a reconciliation at the end of that also. It's one of the most beautiful sets of stories that you can read in all of the Old Testament, really, from chapter 44 on, with one interruption. And it's Joseph with the dreams, being sold, being in Egypt, rising to power, and then being able to save his family and to have a reconciliation with his brothers, forgiving them, and suggesting something extremely interesting. He says, when Joseph, reconciles with his brothers, he said, don't feel too bad, because the hand of the Lord was in even what you were doing. He sent me ahead of you so that I can be in position to save you and the family. And so there is an incredible example of what St. Ignatius Loyola really means by finding God in all things. Okay? I've said before, anybody can find God in a beautiful bird song or a gorgeous sunrise or sunset or something like that, okay? Can we find God in the difficult circumstances also? Can we find God in suffering? Can we look for God there in those places? That's what Joseph is going to be doing. He's going to find God even in the abuse he suffered from his brother, a false accusation that he had from the wife of Potiphar, being put into jail wrongly, and then finally being justified and vindicated and brought into second or third in command in all of Egypt. So it's a beautiful thing to see if you can find God in all things. It's I can speak very, very trivially, I suppose, about that. Others here can speak out of the depths of your hearts of some of the losses and some of the sorrows and sufferings you've had. Can you find God in them? You know? After I do Bible study, I'm going to have a working lunch with Father Jose about Hispanic ministry. Then I want to go over and head to Mobile Infirmary to see Robin Stafford and her daughter, Danny. Danny just suddenly diagnosed with leukemia. She's going to be 30 days in the hospital undergoing chemotherapy. How much can they find God in all things in that circumstance? Very, very difficult, and we all know that. So, the great thing, though, is in this example of the life of Jacob, we see all kinds of falling and failing, but we see transformation, change, and reconciliation and healing. And that's what I wanted to leave you with. Now let's look at Moses. Exodus. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 2. For those of you that are into Sigmund Freud, anybody here into Sigmund Freud? You wouldn't admit it if you were. Okay, he does have a book called Moses and Monotheism. And Freud's thesis, which really can't be supported very well, but it was cleverly written, suggested that in fact, the origins of monotheism come from Egypt, okay? And it was the kind of the maverick king Akhenaten that brought it all together, okay? And that Moses is in fact an Egyptian, not a Jew. Interesting theory. One of the ways he tries to justify it, Freud, is by looking at the formation of the word. Look at some of the names. Who's the great rival king that Moses opposes? Ramses, Ra-Moses. Another great king, Thutmoses. And so the idea is that Moses is a kind of an ending portion of a name. Maybe, I don't know. After all, it might be just the name he was given since he was adopted by the princess. Huh? Okay? But let's look at chapter 2. And we're going to be looking at verse 11. He's been raised now. He was found in the basket. And he's raised as a prince. And so in verse 11 it says, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, seeing no one, killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Then he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man that did the wrong, why do you strike your fellow? He answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. Okay, so Moses here is basically guilty of murder. Okay? From his point of view, he might have called it judicial murder, but it's still murder. Okay? He sees 2 people fighting, one a Hebrew, one an Egyptian, kills him. Lord knows how. Okay? But he does. So this is problematic. Moses, not the nicest person right off the bat. Does he know his Hebrew background? Probably. His own beloved mother was his wet nurse for how many years? Okay? So he could conceivably know who exactly he is, even though he's being raised in the palace. But he does this, and off he goes. He's now in exile himself. He's fleeing to the land of Midian to avoid being killed by Pharaoh, to be executed by Pharaoh. So we continue at the second half of verse 15. Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, And they came and drew water and filled troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to their father Reuel, otherwise known also as Jethro, he said, "How is it that you've come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread with us." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She bore a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I'm a stranger in a strange land." Okay, so we've got the scene of Moses kind of, if you like, doing something right and positive for a change, okay? Something very, very humble. Why would they think he's an Egyptian? Well, he probably dressed like one, probably talked like one, okay? So we've got kind of an opposite situation. Poor Jethro, or Reuel, he's got 7 daughters, okay? You don't hear anything about sons that are involved there. Tevye, in Fiddler on the Roof, laments that he's got 5 daughters. Why? Because you got to get dowries for them, you know? Man, it's too much. So, helping the daughters of Jethro, he gets a wife. He gets a wife, and he's going to stay there for a while. And he's now become a shepherd himself. And then in chapter 3, of course, he sees the burning bush. We get, if you like, this scene. He goes to the burning bush. And by the way, if you read it very, very carefully, you can see that it's confusing as to whether or not it's an angel of the Lord in the bush or it's God himself in the bush. And it seems like it's both simultaneously. Okay? Look at chapter 3. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and lo, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. So, in verse 4, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush. So, who is it? You know, it's kind of confusing in a way. The angel of the Lord, that is to say the presence of God. The presence of God. So, here in summary is the dialogue. Moses, to quote the hymn, "Go down, Moses." Okay? "Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go." Moses says, "I don't want to. I'm not good speaking. I don't know how to do it. Leave me alone." You know, that's how many of us ever are confronted with the circumstance of really kind of knowing that we've got a challenge in front of us that we ought to probably embrace. I say, I don't think so. I'm not really that good. I can't do it. We'll find 100,000 reasons why we're not worthy, right? Okay, so Moses is playing that same game, and God says basically, shut up, go. If you got to have help, your brother Aaron will be just fine. By the way, you wonder where Aaron is during all this. You know, is he living in Egypt? What's going on with Aaron? How did he get born and survive when Moses had to be put into the basket? Is he an older brother or a younger brother? How did all that work? Don't know. But it did. For the sake of the story, it did. And if you want to have some proof, throw down your serpents, your rod. It turns into a serpent. Pick it up now. Touch it by the tail, pick it up, turns back into a rod. There is a blind evangelical singer, kind of evangelist/singer named Ken Medema, who does a routine, or at least he did it in concert, about Moses, okay? And he says, "Do you understand what it means, Moses? Do you see what I'm trying to say, Moses? The rod of Moses becomes the rod of God. And it'll be that same rod that is going to wind up eating the serpents of Pharaoh's magicians. It'll be the same rod that is going to split the waters of the Red Sea." Okay, so the rod of Moses becomes the rod of God. You're going to go, Moses, and you're going to do it. And so he's going to bring the message to Pharaoh. The Lord says, "Let my people go so that they can go a 3-day journey into the wilderness and offer sacrifice and have festival in my honor." And we know how it all works out. Okay, they've crossed the Red Sea, and they're off in the Sinai. And because of various reasons, they start wandering around. And what is the basic theme here? Constant complaining. Constant complaining. They're always, the Jewish people here, the children of Israel, let's go back to Egypt. At least we had good onions and cucumbers and whatnot. And you know, we had the flesh pots to eat out of and everything. This is lousy food. I'm sick of the manna. You know, that's kind of the way it is. God gives them manna, gives them water from the rock. Quail come down. They still grumble. So what does God do? Sends poisonous serpents into their midst and starts biting them, and they're all dying and everything. Okay. Yeah. You would think that there'd be a little bit of humility involved in the people after the first couple of attempts here, you know. But you know what? This is a theme. This is a theme in some of the Psalms, especially ones that we wind up praying, Psalm 78 classically, in Lent, and in the prophets. Okay, in the prophets also. It's constantly pointing fingers at the children of Israel, the Jews, the Israelites, however you'd like to call it, whatever the time frame is. You people constantly turn your back to God. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're unjust, you're blowing off the Sabbath so you can make money, on and on and on, okay? There's that constant theme of God is so merciful, God's doing everything for you, and you are just so ungrateful, I can't stand it. That theme starts right here with the crossing through the desert. And, of course, in Psalm 95, we find out that because they challenged God at the waters of Meribah and Massah, therefore I was so tired of this generation, I swore that they would never enter into my rest. 40 years I put up with them. So a new generation, so to speak, are the ones led by Joshua to get into the promised land. Hard kind of a thing. Constant complaining, constant fidelity from God. And from Moses, too, in many ways. He's the one who has to be the intermediary between God and the people. So, through his intercession, manna comes down, like I said, the quail, the rock, even the healing of this from the serpent's bites. I find this to be interesting because at least the story of the seraph serpents is done in context after the giving of the Decalogue. Okay? So, what that means is that the second commandment is being compromised. You shall not make a graven image of anything, in the skies, on the earth, below, anything. But God commands Moses to make a bronze serpent, so that when people look at it after they've been bitten, they'll be healed. And of course, in John chapter 3, Jesus makes a strong point about the relationship between Moses lifting up the serpent in the desert and the Son of Man who will be lifted up also, so that everyone who comes to him will be healed and saved eternally. So very, very interesting there. But there's Moses, somebody that started off pretty bad, you know, and just changed little by little, starting by doing good things, starting by being faithful, being obedient. And the next thing you know, he's the leader of his people. What's the final judgment on Moses? Is it that he is a murderer? No. The final judgment on Moses is, if I can quote two places in the book of Deuteronomy for you. The first is chapter 18. Where Moses speaks to the people and says in verse 15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brethren. Him you shall heed, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly. Okay, so God is going to bring up somebody to speak on behalf of him with the exact same status as Moses. So much so that this becomes a figure that is anticipated as a messianic style of figure, someone to kind of be a forerunner for the bringing into the kingdom. So in chapter 1 of John's Gospel, for example, the priests and Levites come from Jerusalem to ask John the Baptist, who are you? It says, he admitted right away and did not deny it. He admitted, I am not the Christ. Who are you then? Are you Elijah? Elijah was expected to be a forerunner as well. I am not. Are you the prophet? No. Are you the prophet? Okay, so that prophet, like Moses, became a figure that was expected to be a forerunner and announcer of the end times along with Elijah. Then when the Messiah would actually fully come, then the Messianic kingdom would come. So that's one thing. Moses becomes a standard. And then finally at the very end of Deuteronomy, in chapter 34, Moses dies, goes up Mount Nebo. He is shown the promised land, but told you're not going to enter into it. And so in verse 7, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, and then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. In verse 10, there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all the servants of all the land, for all the mighty power and all the great and terrible deeds which Moses wrought in the sight of all Israel. He's the big one. He's the best. He's the best. He's the standard bearer now. It's also interesting that if you'll notice it says, let's see, in verse 5 and 6. Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no man knows the place of his burial to this day. And it was because of that the belief was that he didn't really die and that God took him, which is one of the reasons why you can expect Moses or a prophet like Moses to come again. And it's one of the reasons, again, why Moses, along with Elijah, appears in the context of the transfiguration. Okay? Those three all together. So Moses winds up starting bad, but winds up being, the epitome of what it means to be a prophet and the friend of God. The friend of God. Now let's finish off with Rahab the harlot. Joshua, in chapter 2, wants to enter and to take the country the way he's supposed to, okay? And he wants to take the city of Jericho, but he wants to know just how bad the situation is going to be. How well defended is this city? So he decides to send spies into Jericho to kind of reconnoiter, okay? It's a great thing. Joshua, in chapter 2, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." And they went. They came into the house of a harlot, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. Well, what do you think they were doing there? Just saying. Okay, there they are. So we continue. It was told the king of Jericho, "Behold, certain men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring forth the men that have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "True, men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. And when the gate was to be closed at dark, they went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly. You may overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax which had lain under the roof. And so the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords, but they never found them. Okay, now we've got the situation of Rahab the harlot being told, "Okay, I've helped you. I want something in return. You guys are going to attack the city. I'm sure God has given you the power to do it. You must protect me and my family." Okay? It's a deal. It's a deal. Take the red thread. That'll be the sign. And they say, you stay in the house with your family. You go out, their blood is not on us. But you stay in, and anything happens to them, your blood is on us. Okay? It'll be our fault. Okay? It won't happen. You stay hidden. We'll take care of you. If you like, it's almost a version of Noah and the ark. Or, in some way, a version of Lot and his wife leaving Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't turn back. Oops, turn back. Okay. Kind of like Orpheus and Eurydice, right? Okay. She's rescued from Hades, and Orpheus is told, for God's sake, whatever else you do, don't turn, look back. And he does, and she disappears forever. So, anyhow, Rahab the harlot has fidelity then, it says, to the Israelites. She strikes the deal and everything works out. Have a quick look at chapter 6 of Joshua. Verse 17. The city of Jericho and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Now, doesn't that sound like ISIS? Yeah, unfortunately. Okay? Put it under the ban was the phrase that was used. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers that we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. In other words, not only are they going to slaughter all the men, women, children, and animals that's in the city, but every other thing that's in there, all the gold and silver and money and all this other kind of stuff, is also being given to God. You can't take anything. You do, and you defeated God. You despised and you defied God. You're going to pay the punishment. But Rahab and her family were saved, and they were rescued. So what happens? Let's go to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1. In verse 5, we see that Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David the king. So Rahab the harlot goes from being a prostitute to being included in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. That's quite a jump, it's quite a jump. She's one of 4 women that are referred to in the genealogy, along with Ruth, as you just heard. And then you never name Bathsheba. She's just referred to as the wife of Uriah. Very interesting there. So Rahab is brought into the genealogy now because of the good that she did to the people of Israel, the children of Israel. Now go to the letter to the Hebrews. Chapter 11. Verse 31. This whole of chapter 11, by the way, is a celebration of the gift and the goodness of faith. Okay? The famous passage in verse 1 is, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And there are going to be a whole series of people that live by faith. Abraham, Moses, and now in chapter 11, verse 30 and 31. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given friendly welcome to the spies. And she's the last one who actually has her story told, because then he says, what more shall I say? And he goes through all the names that he could talk about. Okay? So Rahab becomes celebrated by the author of the letter to the Hebrews as an example of faith. Wow. And that faith always means with reference to Christ, even at a distance. Okay? Even at a distance. Then finally, the letter to James, chapter 2. In the famous discussion about the value of faith versus works, James says, in verse 24, you see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the harlot justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith apart from works is dead. Okay, so Rahab is celebrated, from being a member of the best little whorehouse in Texas or something like that. She becomes what? So she becomes a celebrated person of faith because of what she does. Okay, so I guess that we have to talk about a conversion of life for her too. I guess she got honestly married after this period of being a harlot, encountering the spies for the Hebrew people, somehow aligning herself with them, receiving the protection. There's a conversion process that goes on in her then. She's no longer truly a citizen of Jericho. Now she's an antecedent of faith, a witness to faith, and an ancestor of the Messiah. So it's interesting how these lives develop from one point to another, these three people that we've talked about, Jacob, Moses, and Rahab. Now, I'm stopping there for today, but I'd like to know if you've got questions. Yeah, Shelby? Wait just a second, please. Shelby? Yeah. What is the symbology of the serpent? Okay. Right off the bat, let's just say right now that in Genesis chapter 3, the serpent is not representative of Satan. Okay? Now that interpretation is going to come later on in the development of, particularly in the Johannine literature, particularly in the book of Revelation. But right off the bat, the serpent is the serpent, the cleverest of all of the creatures. Okay? So if you like, if I can go into Norse mythology for a second, the serpent plays the role of Loki, the trickster, okay? The one who, made you screw up, that kind of thing, okay? And gets punished, of course. But the serpent is also symbolic of Egypt, okay? You remember that there's an asp that is on the two-sided crown that the Pharaoh would wear, okay? So it becomes a royal symbol too, okay? That is important for us because one place that the Jews really want to distinguish themselves from would be the Egyptians, the pagans. So the serpent, which is a royal sign for the Egyptians, becomes a sign of negativity for the Israelites. Then, besides that, anybody living in the desert knows how easy it could be to put your hand, as Isaiah chapter 11 says, put your hand on the adder's den. Okay, as they're below the surface hiding, you break open their den, you're going to be bitten, big time. You're going to die. A lot of kids must have died that way, because Isaiah is celebrating the fact that the child and the baby can put their hand on the adder's den. There'll be no harm or hurt in all my holy mountain. Okay, so you've got that natural revulsion, I guess, for snakes. Okay, that is probably the biggest thing right there. Plus the fact that they're deadly. Plus the fact that they represent the royalty of a nation that you are opposed to religiously. Why would God make the bronze serpent? Well, it is. That's what I had said earlier. It is very much like making a graven image, which seems like it's a violation of the Ten Commandments, but I guess if God can give the commandments, he can make an exception too. And for whatever reason, there's a visual connection, I assume, between the bronze serpent of God and these other serpents that God has sent to be a reminder of what you did, why this is happening, and where your salvation comes from. So there's some kind of connection that way as well. It's the best I can offer for you right now. Yes, Connie? With his rod, yes. Okay, that's a complicated question too. Why would striking the rock twice, why would striking the rock twice be some kind of punishment that Moses could not enter the promised land? Okay, let's do a bit of history first. More than likely, Moses did die before they entered the promised land. Now we have to figure out why. Okay, so let's just accept that much. But the story, the way it's told, on its own terms, is like this. What it says is that Moses, at this point, has been dealing with these people so long, he's so frustrated that he's got some doubts in his own mind whether God's going to do anything for them anymore. So he strikes the rock, which he's told to do. Then he strikes it a second time. He's going to beat the thing. And by kind of, so to speak, dissing God, I think that's the argument of the story as to why Moses would not be brought into the promised land. Okay? Oh, good thing that remark was not able to be heard on the recording. Okay, well, keep looking, and if you do, then ask. Okay, yes? Oh, over Jacob, you mean? Yeah, okay. Sure, yeah. It's not just blessings or curses in Old Testament understanding that are words that work, okay? But it's our words too. The letter of James chapter 3 is what talks about how that more damage can be done, more sins can be committed by the tongue than any other organ in the body, okay? And we know how it works. And James talks in that chapter about how the tongue is like the rudder of a great ship. It's a tiny thing, but it steers the directions, you know? I'm not sure I know what you mean by happening spiritually over a child. But you're talking about an insult or a put down or something like that. Well, that takes in. The child takes it in. Okay? Pope Francis is being taken to task now for saying that it's maybe not always inappropriate to spank your kids. You can do damage to kids a lot more maybe with words. Okay? Humiliation, especially if it turns out to be public humiliation. You can, by telling them you're ugly, you're stupid, you're no good. They hear it long enough, they start believing that, okay? And when you talk about zero self-image, then all kinds of negative behaviors start acting out, whether it's substance abuse of one kind or another, sexual activity of one kind or another, gangs, all of that can be bred by bad words. So that you think you're disciplining your kid, you're actually laying a curse on that child in many ways. And if the words of the Old Testament, the blessings and curses of the Old Testament are words that work, our words work too. They really do. You can either build up or you can tear down. And yeah, that's absolutely true. Any others? Still finding it. Well, we looked at chapter 3, 2 and 3, first of all. Yeah. Okay. One of the places where it can look like there's a bit of a gap is that in the beginning of chapter 2, it turns out that Ruel is the priest of Midian. In the beginning of chapter 3, it's now Jethro, the priest of Midian, who is Moses' father-in-law. So you get two different names for the same guy. That might be one place where you can see that there's a kind of a gap or jumping about a bit, perhaps. Yeah, Mary? What is the basis for the belief of some of the rabbis that Isaac knew Jacob was Jacob and not Esau at the end? Well, I'm not sure how they justified it. The only thing that I could suggest is we could go back to that section for a minute. Well, that's where I'm going to. Okay, I'm going to the end of 27 and the beginning of 28 in Genesis. And that's when, in fact, at that point, after the trickery, okay, it says that Isaac does bless Jacob and says, you don't marry one of these foreign women. You go back up to your home country where your mother came from, and you go marry somebody from your own family. And he gives him another blessing. So that would be the only thing that I could think off the top of my head. I'm not sure what the rabbis themselves would say or have said. still looking. Any other questions? Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to wind it up then. And Connie, if you find the question, the passage later, you can ask me next week. Okay. Yeah. Let's close with a prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, give us hearts that are willing to change. Give us hearts that recognize where we have been, know where we're called, and by your grace, let us go there. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.